In this video, we'll go over the basics of connecting MIDI to Lemur. So let's drag a fader onto the canvas, and we're going to get this fader to send out MIDI controller number 1, so it acts just like a mod wheel. The easiest way to assign a MIDI message to a controller is using the MIDI mapping panel. So for the message type, we'll set this to control change, and for the controller, we'll set this to 1. And as soon as I do that, you'll see Lemur copied the 1 to both fields. And the reason you need to set this in both places is because it's possible to scale this value over a range. And we'll see how this works in a later video. So I've got Cubase open here, and I've got a MIDI track. And right now, this track isn't connected to any MIDI ports. So let's just connect it up. I've got the Lemur daemon running on my computer. So I've got the Lemur daemon ports. So let's just connect it up to Lemur daemon input 0. Next, we need to go into the Lemur Editor and connect that fader up to that same MIDI port. So you might be thinking that you could come into this MIDI mapping panel and find a drop-down where you can select the MIDI port, but there isn't one. And to understand why, you need to remember that right now we're looking at the Lemur Editor. And the Lemur Editor is just a controller designer, and it doesn't send any MIDI, so it doesn't know how you're going to connect your iPad to MIDI. So instead, Lemur uses targets. And if you come to the MIDI mapping panel, you'll see this drop-down target, and there are 8 targets that you can connect to, numbered from 0 to 7. So let's connect up to Lemur Target 0. And now I'll come into the Lemur app, and I'll tap the cogwheel at the top right, and go to More Settings. And in the center is a section called MIDI Targets, and it's here that you're going to map Lemur targets in the editor to physical MIDI ports connected to your device. Connections in the From column are MIDI inputs into your device, and connections in the To column are MIDI outputs out of your device. So since we mapped the fader to Lemur Target 0, I'll tap the From column in Lemur Target 0, and as soon as I do that, Lemur is going to show me all of the MIDI ports that it can find connected to my iPad. And because I'm using the Lemur daemon, which supports both Wi-Fi and USB out of the box, it's showing me 2 versions of the same port. I've got a USB connection right now, so I'll connect to Lemur daemon output 0. And I'll do the same thing in the To column. Lemur daemon input 0. Great. So now this fader should be connected to Lemur daemon input 0. So we'll go back into Cubase, and we'll hit record, and move my fader, and there we go. We're getting MIDI. So Lemur targets are really great because they allow you to design your controller in the editor without needing to know anything about the MIDI connections on your iPad. And they also act as a sort of group. So I can drag more faders onto the canvas, and I'll set each of these faders Lemur targets to Lemur Target 0. And now all of these faders are going to go out the same MIDI port that is connected in the Lemur app to Lemur Target 0. But there's actually a better way to set the Lemur target for multiple controls, and that is to use a container. So I'm going to drag a container onto the project, and I'll cut and paste these faders inside. And now I'm going to set the Lemur target for the container itself. So I'll come to the MIDI mapping panel, and I'll set the Lemur target to 0. And now for each of the faders, I'm going to set the target to parent. And parent is going to inherit the Lemur target from the container. So I'll assign this to parent and this one to parent. And now when I change the Lemur target of the container to Lemur Target 1, you'll see the fader is now inheriting Lemur Target 1, Lemur Target 1, Lemur Target 1. So if the container is the parent for the faders, then what is the parent of the container? And that is the project. And the project is the root for all Lemur controller files, and it represents sort of the global namespace of the project. So just like it's possible to set the Lemur target of a container, it's also possible to set the Lemur target of a project. So I can come into the MIDI mapping panel and assign this to Lemur Target 1. And now for the container, I'll assign its target to parent, and now this cascades. The project is assigned to Lemur Target 1, and the container inherits Lemur Target 1, and so do the faders. So this is a common way to set the Lemur target for an entire project. However, if you can avoid doing this, I would highly advise you to do so. And the reason is because there's only one global project object. So if you want to share controllers or merge 2 controllers together, you're likely going to have a conflict and have to go through all of your controls and potentially remap them so that they're either on the same target or on different targets. But another reason that it's better to use a container is that I can right-click on a container and select Export, and I'll just call this 3 faders. And now I've got a reusable module that I can bring into other Lemur projects. So I can start to build up a collection of Lemur widgets that I can share amongst all of my projects. And now changing the Lemur target for this widget is simply a matter of changing the Lemur target of the container.